Welcome to the 3XR podcast. This week's episode was recorded right after we participated in the 2020 AR/VR Summit, which was an online event. We're going to discuss how the online event went and some of the future learnings, especially in this kind of post-pandemic world. Enjoy!
Welcome to the 3XR podcast. We know a lot about 3D and we're working to digitize the world one 3D model at a time. One thing that we're learning a little bit about is how to create a podcast. So join us each week as we talk about who we are, what we're doing here at 3XR, share new and emerging technology, and forecast what the XR future is going to look like. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. This is our second episode of the 3XR podcast. We're excited to have Mike Festa here again, just the two of us. So today we wanted to take a chance to sort of reflect and recap our recent participation in the VRAR Global Summit that happened last week. So Mike, I don't know if you want to, you previously were involved in the VRAR Boston chapter, Association Boston chapter. So I don't know if you want to just kind of tell us a little bit more about the organization and.
Yeah, absolutely. So they've been around for a number of years. I think it's like 4 or 5 years. And the idea being that we could put together a global network of folks that were already having these conversations in their local chapters or local cities. So Boston VR has been around for a number of years. I think I've been involved with that since maybe 2014. That particular group, the Boston VR group, started as, enthusiasts, hobbyists, professionals that have been working in the virtual reality space for decades, really. And the group was relatively new, I think, around this new wave of virtual reality that we were starting to see back then around Oculus and some of these lower cost headsets that offered some of the performance that, you used to have to pay 6 figures for back in the 90s. And so this started as kind of an informal meetup group of folks that would show off different technologies or different products or different demos. And that group still is independent and growing and going strong. What the VRAR Association is more of a global network of different leaders within these communities that are engaging amongst each other. So either with business opportunities, customer engagement, equipment rentals. There are a number of global challenges that we felt like a network of leaders could kind of come together and accomplish. And so this global summit is an event that happens typically twice a year now. I went to one, I think it was about 1.5 years ago, in person in Vancouver, and this was the first virtual event that we did. And so we'll talk a little bit later about, comparing and contrasting how a real world event and how a virtual event unfold. But the association in general has been around, again, for a few years, looking to, bring more knowledge and experience to folks with a bit of a focus on industry. And as Melina mentioned, I used to be the chapter president for a few years in Boston. And we worked with local companies like PTC that were embracing augmented reality and helping them connect their offering with other companies around the world.
What was that like as chapter president or as the president of the Boston chapter? It's a global reach for the VRAR Association, which I think is pretty cool, right? Mm-hmm. Like we were chatting with some folks in, I think, Argentina, Central America, there are chapters all over. So what was that engagement like? And
one thing that's interesting to note, I think, about the technologies, especially more on the VR side, is the adoption in the US isn't necessarily like, the first mover in the world. We see like in Asia, for example, there's a lot more adoption of this technology. And so it's interesting to be able to share stories, ideas, market successes with different regions to see how, people react and embrace the technology and, learnings you can get from Europe and how they apply to the US, et cetera. And so I think that's been really fascinating to think about how different groups are engaging with their local, user base, like the people that go to these meetups and events, as well as the community at large and the market at large.
Cool. Yeah, I know. I think it was personally pretty cool how we were just starting our day and folks were wrapping up, or like we were jumping into our booth and chatting with some folks in Australia and the Netherlands and London. So it was, I think that was probably one of my favorite parts. And I don't know if we want to kind of pivot into like what we learned and the exciting
Yeah, and it's probably worth just describing like exactly what it was. So this was using a platform called Hopin, and in a lot of ways it felt kind of like Zoom meetings, almost like Zoom speed dating. And so, Melina was there holding down the booth 3 days, I believe. Probably felt like longer.
Yeah. Felt like about 3 days.
And yeah, maybe you want to describe a little bit about, your experience using the platform.
Yeah, so I think, this was the first time I personally had ever attended a virtual event of this nature. To your point, it definitely did feel like speed dating at times. And we had a virtual booth, and essentially how it worked is I would be manning the booth, and it felt kind of like this, where I was just staring at myself on video all day. And talking to myself at times, but then folks could either jump into a chat feature in our booth and share either a question or introduce themselves, send personal contact information. We would include a hyperlink in there to, a sign-up form for folks to send us their information so we can stay in touch with them. And then they also had the option to join in on the conversation physically by turning their video on. Mm-hmm. So I think what was fun for me was, and this was just a hurdle of the platform, was we could see how many people were in our booth, which was great. I'm like, awesome. I have 10 people I'm talking to. And so I'd say, hi, 10 people. How's everyone doing today? Not sure where you are in the world, but jump into the chat and provide your information. Say hello. Let us know where you're joining the conference from. And when they would jump into the chat, I use that as kind of an opportunity to pressure them a little bit to turn their video on. And
no, you're very good at it. You're very diplomatic, I would say. And it did make for the, conversations to be more engaging. I think there is that initial intimidation factor as a participant or viewer to, just jump in like that. And I think the people that did end up doing it, basically got a lot more out of the experience, and we're expressing some gratitude towards you as well for getting them to do it, because it is something that it's not natural, especially if it's your first conference, and you're like, all right, should I put on my video or not? Like, what's my background look like? Are people going to judge me, etc.? There's a lot of that kind of self-consciousness that at least I personally felt when jumping into some of the other booths. And then once you get used to it, and it's like going up to a booth in real life. It's intimidating the first time, and then after you do it and you realize like, hey, these are friendly people that just want to help me out or talk to me or learn more about me. Then the intimidation factor kind of goes away. But to your point, Melina, too, we had this like counter to say how many people were in the room. But we also had no idea when people were leaving and coming in. So if it was like, the same couple people were there for an hour, or if it was like every 5 minutes, it was a fresh audience. So I think that was a challenge for us to kind of overcome. And, we came up with some strategies around repeating the messaging periodically. But it would have been, a nice feature to have, I would say, for a future event, if there was at least a way to see, even if it was anonymous, like, so-and-so has been in the room for 45 minutes or 3 minutes. And as people are jumping in or leaving, we'd at least know, oh, there's a lot of new people here. We should go back and introduce ourselves again.
So I compare it to AOL Instant Messenger, right? So when you're in a chat room and you can see so-and-so entered the room or so-and-so left the room, that would be phenomenal from an exhibitor standpoint. Mm-hmm. Like, that would have been so helpful for me to know that Carl Smith entered the room, and I can say, hey, Carl, would love to chat with you. Any questions, let us know, right? Because as an exhibitor, we're hoping to be there and answer any questions that folks might have, or if they're even remotely interested in what we're offering and, are looking for a 3D model or looking to create a 3D model. We were interestingly attracting both parties, which made it.
Yeah, that's actually another good point to mention, is that, 3XR as a company is kind of building a two-sided marketplace. So on the one hand, we're serving, brands and agencies that are looking to enhance their online shopping experience with digital content. On the other hand, we're trying to empower artists to get access to opportunities for creating that content without having to go through the full negotiation process and, proving themselves out, doing free work. This is more of a community platform where artists internally can, kind of self-rank and self-review and build up their own portfolios, reputations, and credentials to get access to the most exclusive jobs. But initially, we want to make it open to everybody from, the hobbyist and student that's just getting started. We can give them some, simpler work to start with, and then they kind of earn their way up. On the other side, the brands that, are looking to go from a successful pilot where they've, shown that with, let's say, 10 products, they were able to increase their sales a good amount. Now they want to do it for hundreds or thousands of products. The same, agency that did the initial 10 products, or maybe they did that in-house, that process doesn't really scale. And so we're trying to come in as a solution to address both sides. So in an event like this conference attracts people, basically anyone who's interested in technology, whether they're looking for how can, augmented reality enhance my ability to sell, to, hey, I love AR, I love playing video games, I love 3D. How can I put my skill set to use to find these new jobs of the future? And so we're able to engage with people on, different sides and that crossed over. And so it was really fascinating to, interact with that audience.
Yeah. And I would say that was another thing that really stood out to me was everyone was so excited to be there, right? And just to learn and to talk and to share. I mean, we got into, I think, some like tangent conversations in the booth around technologies, right? Just
like future of computing.
Totally over my head.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about this at the end of this episode. We're going to talk about the future of conferencing and how this technology can enable, maybe not today, but in 10 years or in 20 years, what it might look like. And we were having a lot of interesting conversations like that throughout the booth.
Yeah.
Even one about podcasting. And so, coming back to this, it's our second episode. We were, somewhat inspired by getting out there and just talking to people, finding that, we think we have some interesting things that we can contribute and talk about. Yep. And so one of the ways that, you as a viewer can engage us is through either the comments or directly reach out to us directly through the website. We're, in the early stages of this, and we're still figuring out, what works, what topics you want to hear about, what's the right format. And so, again, we'd love to get your feedback. This is just the second time for us. And the biggest piece of advice we got was just to press record and get started.
Yep.
So that's what we're doing. This isn't necessarily, the same format that we'll see a year from now. But we're starting with something, and we're all remote now too. So I'm broadcasting from my home as is Melina, and maybe there'll be a 3XR studio in the next couple episodes that is a little bit more established at the office.
Yep. In the meantime, we're doing our best to try to remain branded with our color clothing or just what's behind us. I mean, for me, I curated the pillows on my sofa. But for Mike,
I happen to have a banner that we ordered. We actually were at PAX, which is the Penny Arcade Expo, the East version, which is held in Boston, right before COVID really shut everything down. So that was the last physical conference that I went to, and we happened to order this booth just for that event, and hadn't really had the opportunity to use it other than that one time. So I've been making use of it now as a Zoom background.
Yeah. So Mike, I'd love to use some of the rest of the time here just to talk about, advice for attendees. I have a handful of thoughts that are top of mind for me. And then maybe we can talk a little bit, like you mentioned, about sort of how AR is influencing the future of events and how there is such a shift. Obviously, we have no choice but the industry has no choice but to host virtual events. So, I think before we jump into that, my advice to attendees, if you are attending a booth or listening to a session live, whether there is that notion and that aspect of engaging with somebody personally, make yourself known. So it's just the same as going to an event in person, right? I mean, my stack of business cards is absolutely collecting dust, which is so sad, but someday we'll be using them again. And so I think in the place of attending a booth and going to, shake someone's hand in person and sanitize your hand immediately after, what we have is technology on our side and LinkedIn and, reaching out to someone to get your name out there to say, hey, I didn't meet you directly at this event, but I heard you speak and I'd love to have a follow-up conversation. I think those are the folks who are making the most of these events and just making the most of the opportunity that's presented to them. So I know my LinkedIn network has grown. I don't know. I must have added like 40 people, 30 or 40 people after that event. And I have messages that I still have to respond to, right? Of folks who are interested in joining our artist community, which is awesome because we need those guys and women. And then on the flip side, it's just, hey, I thought you were interesting to listen to. So those are probably my big points of advice for attendees. I learned a lot about exhibiting and about, having collateral ready to go and having a repeatable model. Every 30 minutes we did our pitch. We showed the video. We showed our video that essentially talks about who we are as a company and sort of what we're doing over here at 3XR with enabling brands to, elevate their experience with 3D models. So it was a great learning for us because we're absolutely going to be doing this, if not 5 more times, 10, 20 over the next year, I would assume. So we've talked a lot about the specifics of how the booth went for us and what our experience was like. I guess my 3 main key takeaways and advice for folks who are participating in an event that's similar to this one would be, talk to the people that you see if you can. So if you can jump into the booth and turn your video on, if you're camera ready, go for it. I think putting a face to a name really helps and really makes it go that extra mile. Although you aren't shaking hands and handing out business cards, I would say LinkedIn is sort of like the digital version of that. So like your digital business card is your LinkedIn profile. I know I specifically got, 30 or 40 LinkedIn recommendations, either that I sent someone who I was speaking with and they jumped into our booth, or that they sent me as a follow-up to a conversation that we had. So it's a great way to expand your network and connect with folks who you never know. Maybe it's a future job opportunity. Maybe it's a future partner that you can work with, a customer. So those are probably my main points of advice for folks who are participating, and use it as like a conversation piece too. Post on your LinkedIn with what you learned from attending the event. I think that's a really great way too to strike up some conversation on social media and just get your voice out there.
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of people, that's part of the reason we wanted to do this episode, was people are out there wondering, what's the future of conferences look like? How is it working today? Is it worth going to these events? A lot of them, the costs are lower. There's less overhead to deal with. Even if the event itself still has a ticket price, those are typically less than they would be for an in-person event. And you also don't have to worry about travel and, planes, hotels, etc. And so there's a lot of pros, I think. There's some cons that it's still not the same as meeting people in person.
Right.
But I think there's a lot to like. It was convenient to be able to just get up and go, be at an activity or event or a booth for, a specific amount of time, jump into some other context, another meeting without having to go anywhere. So I felt like I was more efficient than I would have been if I had to block off a whole week for a trade show.
Right.
And so I think, there's some value there. Maybe it's a good time to kind of wrap things up with what we think the future is going to bring and maybe how this experience is going to evolve. One of the more, futuristic things that I participated in, it was somewhat part of this event. I don't think it was directly linked, but there was a VR meetup. The Chicago chapter held their meeting basically in the middle of this in AltSpace. AltSpace is this. It's primarily a virtual reality platform, but it's not limited to virtual reality. You can actually log in through a computer or tablet, and you have an avatar. It looks more like a Mii from the Nintendo Wii a few years ago, where it's pretty cartoony. You get if you want to look like a human, enough control to recognize people, which I thought was fun. You can also be kind of an anonymous robot in there too. And the interactions with people I found to be the most interesting part of the entire experience and the platform, in that it felt very much like going to a physical meetup where you're moving your avatar around, and especially in VR, you're kind of teleporting and you're seeing people cluster the way they would in real life, like around a circle of people. And the technology itself works with proximity. So you're going to hear conversations that you're physically near, your avatar is close to. And if you want to, you see someone across the room that you recognize, either their username, their profile, etc., you can kind of jump over there or walk over there, hang out in the corner and listen to the conversation. But generally people were, getting engaged. They were circling around, looking at each other and making eye contact, which is, I think, the best part. That's what's really missing now from Zoom, is you're trying to, right now, trying to look at the camera, but I'm not able to see Melina at the same time, which feels unnatural. And so with VR experience, even though you don't see that person for their, full flesh and blood self, you see the gestures, you see kind of the head nods and the hand waves and the shakes of your hand controllers too, that really bring a level of personal connection to this entire digital meeting space, that I think if VR headsets were a little more widespread today, might have emerged as kind of the big thing. I think Zoom ended up being, the big thing right now, because that's just where we're at technologically. And an analogy that I've made in the past, and I'll probably continue to make, is kind of the early days of the internet. I think maybe 2000, this time, getting a little more modern. In 2000, video probably existed. It was low quality, low bandwidth, and maybe not very good at real time. You had some emerging webcams, but it wouldn't have worked. If this COVID-19 happened back then, COVID 00 or COVID 01, let's say, the experience would have been much different. I don't think people would have been able to have the same level of productivity that Zoom's enabled. Likewise, I think, 10, 20 years from now, if there's another pandemic or other reasons that people are kind of spending more time working remotely, the technology that we're going to have in that time period is going to make this experience feel antiquated, in my opinion. I don't know if you had some thoughts you wanted to share, Melina, around what this, whole COVID crisis was like for you.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I was prepping for mentally, and, I was expecting to be attending events, to be networking, 5 months into this role here I'm 5 months in here at 3XR, and I was looking forward to to meetups that are specific to the AR/VR space, as I learn more about what this industry is like, and which conversations I need to be having and with who. And so I was looking forward to a handful of, Boston conferences that were going to be happening, and attending Vegas market and High Point Furniture Market, and having customer conversations in the flesh to see the real product and help showcase, especially we have AR enabled 3D models over here. And so a big part of that is showing on your phone, and and really that experience coming to life in real life. So for me, I think, it's just been an adjustment. And from a sales point of view, actually, it's been interesting to be selling via Zoom call instead of via cold call, through just, calling on your phone. But I think networking wise, honestly, I feel like this space, the 3D space, is really encouraging the virtual meetups.
Yeah, I would think if there's any industry that's going to advance, especially a virtual thing like an alt space, it's
Right.
going to be this industry because you have a lot more people
Absolutely.
that know that it's even a thing and
Yep.
that have access to the hardware. One of the outcomes, which I think, Melina, we're still waiting on you to make your order, but
Yeah.
our sales rep Liz ordered her Oculus Quest, and we're going to start trying to utilize the technology in-house with our own organization,
Yep.
meetings, etc. One of the opportunities that I think 3XR has is the conversation around the 3D model. Like, we're producing these models, we're producing them for brands, we're producing them with artists, and we're discussing, the look and the feel and the quality and the areas that need improvement. I think, virtual reality could facilitate a more natural design discussion where you have people naturally around this 3D thing and you could reach out and grab it and point to it and mark
Right.
it up. I think that for me feels like a near term opportunity that we can start leveraging this hardware in our own daily use case.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe, industries that are, tangentially related, like we're seeing architecture firms utilize it now because they can do design walkthroughs. We're seeing, car manufacturers use it in their prototype phase so they can rapidly, see what it's like. You sit in the car, you see the interior, check out a few different styles. So it feels like, VR today is still focused highly on these specialized enterprise use cases. But in 5-10 years, let's say VR headsets are now a slim pair of glasses, and you can reach consumers and mass market. There's going to be a lot more interesting, natural, I think, communications that happen in an environment that's kind of somewhere in that XR spectrum. Maybe it's not full virtual reality. Maybe you're bringing in digital avatars into your space, or you've got a conference room. Instead of having to travel to the client location, you like beam them in essentially. I think
Right.
we'll see some of that type of thing start to take off for a more broader use case, but
Yeah.
it's probably still another 5 to 10 years out.
Yeah.
Like, a lot of this stuff, it's just dependent on consumer awareness, price points, and slim form factor, battery life, all the things that like we've taken for granted on the like the smartphone side. I think if we were to compare, the original iPhone that came on a 2G network without an app store with barely anything, we wouldn't really recognize that device anymore. Likewise, I think like, these VR headsets today are going to pretty quickly feel antiquated, and, people say like, why were you putting these like toasters on your face? Like, why wouldn't you just use a slim pair of glasses? And it's just because that takes time for the technology to get
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. I'm excited for, and this came up. I think we were talking about glasses in the booth. That was one of many very interesting tangents that we got on with folks around, you know, the glasses. I would love for the glasses to look something like mine, but the reality is, the first version that it's Apple, right, who's coming out with or they
That's
look,
like that's all the rumor, right? That's the big
yeah,
rumor mill. And
right,
there's a number of other, companies that have been making products in this space. And I think we're going to see Apple be one of the main players driving the consumer awareness. But these other companies that are making headsets are also going to benefit from it. And most of them, other than the HoloLens and the Magic Leap, they don't, as far as I know, I don't think there's any other ones that do the full environmental tracking, which can add a lot to the experience. So some of the devices now that are focused more on the industrial use case will bring up information, but that information follows you as you move your head around. I think the more advanced devices, which hopefully includes Apple's glasses, understand the space, and so when you turn your head, that product kind of stays over there. And the main problem with the HoloLens and the Magic Leap that do this today is the field of view gets cut off. So when you move your head and that object stays there, you see it kind of get sliced in the corner of your vision. Having a full field of view is, one of these kind of holy grail ideas. I doubt that'll happen in the first Apple glasses product. It'd be amazing if it did, but there aren't. The miniaturization challenge, that Melina's talking about, getting the slim glasses, is kind of in direct contrast to increasing the field of view. You could make these huge field of view, like let's say VR headsets now, and they look like, a giant helmet. And I don't know if AR has something, maybe some of these companies have some interesting tech up their sleeves. Like Magic Leap was rumored to have something amazing. And then, when they came out with their consumer product, they had to make some compromises in order to miniaturize it, such that the original kind of revolutionary components that they were touting never really made it to the consumer marketplace. And so there's always going to be these challenges around, like, something that looks promising and getting all of the things you need: the price, the size, the weight, the battery life, the performance, the form factor. It's a lot. So we're asking a lot of our, forward thinking tech companies. And so hopefully the consumer will find some of these products compelling, even if they're not, as slim and sleek as the glasses they wear today. But by buying into this ecosystem and helping push it forward, it's only a matter of time before, it's contacts or it's an embedded implant or whatever. It's just something we take for granted as technology, and it just disappears. I feel like when Wi-Fi first came out, it was like, this is amazing. Like, how am I getting, data? Like, I got a laptop now that has its own power source and internet now, and I can just take that anywhere.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And so, like, I think we'll see that same evolution happen with glasses, that, the average person will have no idea how it works. They'll just take it for granted. And in that case, we'll be pretty successful as an industry.
Yeah. So I think that would actually be a great topic for an additional
podcast. We'll have to add that to a new podcast. Exactly. So coming soon to a podcast near you. We'll talk a little more in-depth tech around some of the challenges for these wearable headsets.
Yeah, and I think maybe even like a review. So as just a spoiler, Mike owns many, and I think it'd be cool to do some sort of like a try on kind of.
Yeah, maybe even a little, short history in the evolution of these devices.
Yeah. But I think that's all we had for today, right?
Great. Yeah, I think that's great. So, stay tuned for more. And thanks.
Thanks for joining us this week on the 3XR podcast. Make sure to visit our website, 3xr.com, where you can subscribe to the show. While you're at it, if you found value in the show, we'd appreciate you simply telling a friend about it. Be sure to tune in next week for our next episode. Thanks for being a part of the 3XR community.